We have a lot of injury updates. We have a ton of players to talk about, so I don't want to waste your time at the top. We're going to go CMC, Tyreek, Eckler, Bijan, Chase, Diggs, Cup. There's nothing to ask. There's no do I start him, do I don't. Really, the only thing that you would ever be thinking about is, okay, in DFS, is he worth the salary? But in your regular fantasy football league, you know that these guys are locked and loaded studs in your lineup every single week. Now, going down to our next tier, Davante Adams will be our next guy. Now, with Adams, wide receiver that you will have locked and loaded. Now, yes, last week it was a Myers week. Now, yes, last week Davante Adams at times seemed like he was being used more so as a decoy, dealing with the shoulder injury. I think Adams should be out there this week. They are 3-point favorites over New England as well. Now, Keenan Allen, our next guy. I mean, in this game, you want as many Chargers, as many Cowboys as you can get. Vegas says this is the highest scoring game of the week. Now, at the same time, I will say you have no Mike Williams, so that makes Keenan Allen elite. But he's not going to be the wide receiver 2 rest of season, right? Because so far this year, you've had Tyreek Hill, then Keenan Allen in points per game. Eckler coming back in will take some targets away, but still, you start Keenan Allen. A.J. Brown, our next guy. With A.J. Brown, he was a buy low candidate for us back after the first 2 weeks. Now maybe he's a sell high guy just because it looks like nobody thinks Devonta Smith is anything anymore. And I still think that these guys are going to go back and forth. But clearly A.J. Brown is the wide receiver 1. It is a tough matchup going up against the Jets. St. Brown will be our next wide receiver going up against Tampa. You have Jameson Williams in here. Now Sam Laporta did not practice today, but Amon-Ra St. Brown did. So we're going to continue to monitor this. And with St. Brown, wide receiver 16 so far this year from a points per game perspective, really I have no concerns though. Travis Etienne as our next guy is a running back that we bought low on every single week. Y'all know this is the guy we're going after. Simply because, hell, he has one of the safest workloads you're going to find in the NFL. He's a young running back on his rookie contract where it's not like he's 30 years old like Derrick Henry where maybe you have to be worried about an injury coming around the corner. And going up against Indy, your 4-point favorites. So the Jacksonville Jaguars should be able to run the ball in the second half. Pollard will be our next guy. I understand Tony Pollard hasn't been good as of late. I know some people are worried about Pollard. Pollard's going to be just fine, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, yes, when you're going up against the toughest defense in the NFL and your entire offense collapses, it will be ugly. And I know everybody and their mom was watching that 49ers game, but going forward, it should be better. And then Raheem Mostert will be our next running back at 14. With Mostert, you have to start him. You have no Devon Achane, and you are a 13.5-point favorite against the Carolina Panthers, where the Carolina Panthers have given up the most, or I believe the second most points to the running back position, only behind the Denver Broncos so far this season. And Mostert was the number 1 player in fantasy football through the first 3 weeks this season. And David Montgomery will be our next guy. Obviously, Montgomery, must-start option. Looks like Gibbs may not play this week. If you have no Jahmyr Gibbs, honestly, I think you can move Montgomery possibly over Raheem Mostert. I mean, obviously, all these guys are must-start players, so it doesn't really matter one way or another. Now, dropping down to our next tier, we're going to be going Josh Jacobs at 16. Y'all keep asking if you should sell Josh Jacobs, and I still don't understand why. Yes, the offense is bad. Yes, the offensive line is bad. But in a PPR format, when you're getting this kind of receiving usage from Josh Jacobs, he is a player that you have to start, ladies and gentlemen. Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall will be our next 2 players. Walker going up against Cincinnati, your 2.5-point dog. Excited to see this offense coming out of the bye week, though. We do need to monitor the Zach Charbonnet usage. With Breece Hall, yes, he went out there and he crushed it last week. Y'all know after week 1, I mean, we were saying to go out there and sell Breece Hall high, go sell him for Travis Etienne. Then his value tanked. Last week, we called him a buy low candidate. I mean, just kind of looking at the matchups, you're like, okay, it's probably going to be a blow-up spot against Denver. This week, it will be a much tougher matchup going up against Philadelphia. I think we're going to get a much better sense of who Breece Hall actually is in this game. Obviously, you know he's talented. He has the workload, but can he overcome the offense? Kyren Williams, our next running back. With Kyren Williams, he has the workload. Last week, it was tough because he himself went up against Philly. I don't think you have to be worried about Kyren Williams taking a step back with Cooper Kupp in this offense by any means. Kyren is still the guy. Much better matchup going up against Arizona, where we should assume that he's a little more efficient, has some more touchdown upside. DeAndre Swift, our next running back at 20. With Swift, the Gainwell usage is a little bit concerning, and this is something that we want to continue to monitor. And if you wanted to rank Alvin Kamara ahead of him, I wouldn't fault you at all. Like, you go over to Underdog right now, Alvin Kamara is a pick 'em at like 95.5 total yards. They're projecting Alvin Kamara to just see a ridiculous amount of volume against the Houston Texans. where Swift is a little bit lower, but I'm looking at the two offenses and I'm just saying, well, you know what? Philly's going to score so many more points than New Orleans. Joe Mixon right up there as well. If you look at those underdog pick'ems, they have Joe Mixon at about 90 total yards this week as well. Going up against Seattle, you're at a 2.5-point favorite. Should be able to run the ball in the second half. The main thing we're going to be looking at is, will Joe Burrow be healthy and will they be able to actually push the lead in this game? Then our next two wide receivers will be CeeDee Lamb and Puka. If you are looking at these options, yes, I understand CeeDee Lamb is concerning. I mean, Jerry Jones is out there saying he wants to get the tight ends more involved over CeeDee. I don't know what's happening. Lamb's out there on Twitter tweeting out LOL, cryptic wide receiver messages. Nonetheless, I know it looks like the sky is falling down. It looks like everything is crashing. Ultimately, Las Vegas sportsbooks have the Dallas Cowboys with a massive edge in their implied team total compared to a lot of these other players. And you'd say the same thing with Puka. Both these offenses are supposed to be some of the top offenses in the NFL this week. I know nobody's concerned about Puka, whereas people are concerned about Lamb because of the 49ers game. But moving down to our next tier, we're going to have Derrick Henry at 25. Henry, you're a 3-point dog against Baltimore, and we've seen what happens, right? If you have the Tennessee Titans winning the game, Derrick Henry gets involved, Derrick Henry gets a ton of usage. However, if Tennessee falls behind, then you're going to get more and more Tajee Spears, and Derrick Henry looks like he may be in a game that happens this week. DJ Moore as our next guy at 26. The wide receiver 4 from a points per game perspective so far this season. Great matchup going up against Minnesota as well. You just have to assume the efficiency falls backwards. The past 2 weeks, he's played the 2 worst defenses in the NFL in terms of allowing points to be scored. Will be, still a good matchup this week, just not as good as it was over the prior 2 weeks. And I'm not necessarily saying that DJ Moore is a bum, right? And we're still ranking him at 26. And honestly, I'd still probably look to sell him high if you can go get someone like CeeDee Lamb instead. But on Underdog, they have his pick him at 56.5 receiving yards. Completely fine to go through and take more than 56.5 yards. And of course, if you want to check out that Underdog pick'em, you can find that link in the comment section. You can find that link in the description. Promo code FLOCK, you're going to be getting a 100% deposit match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers. And because it was our birthday this week, Underdog hooked everybody up. Please make sure you are taking advantage of this with a Justin Herbert special pick'em for Monday night, more than less than half a total yard. And on top of that, if you're new to Underdog with promo code FLOCK, you'll also be getting a Joe Burrow special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for Sunday. Now, our next guy will be Calvin Ridley. Ridley gave you the bounce back last week. Zay Jones may play. Zay Jones may not play. Honestly, I'm not too concerned about Zay Jones anymore based off what we saw this past week. Then Saquon Barkley looks like he will be good to go. And with Barkley, we've had so many people in the live streams going, Mason, I'm scared. Mason, do we sell Barkley? I understand why, right? The offensive line is dog water. Saquon Barkley dealing with the ankle. This looks to be one of the worst offenses in the entire NFL, where they are 14-point dogs to the Buffalo Bills. Now, with that being said, he still has the volume. He still has the receiving usage. So with Saquon Barkley, I would still rank him as, at minimum, a high-end RB2 in fantasy, even with the very serious red flags that you have associated. Now, Brandon Ayuk will be our next player. With Ayuk, very tough matchup going up against Cleveland. Nico Collins then next. You probably have no Tank Dell. Tank Dell not taking a lot of volume regardless. I think this could easily be a Nico Collins bounce back game. Devonta Smith, I would like to rank him actually higher than this. His Underdog pick'em's only at 52.5 receiving yards this week. I love that Underdog pick'em. But nonetheless, you're going up against the Jets, and against the Jets here, really tough matchup. I do expect to get a bounce back, though. And then Olave, another player expected to bounce back with. Olave, wide receiver 35 from a points per game perspective, should be much better going forward. Keep in mind the first 3 weeks when he was healthy and Derek Carr was healthy, he was averaging over 100 receiving yards per game. Now, dropping down to our next tier, Jalen Waddle, another player that I expect to have a bounce back. With Waddle, it's just tough because you're looking at it saying, oh, okay, well, are we having to deal with a game that just gets out of hand and Miami runs the ball in the second half? They're 2 touchdown favorites over Carolina. Carolina can't score, so they may run the ball in the second half, but I'm still in on Waddle. Then Metcalf will be our next guy at 34. Like I said, I think Metcalf is potentially a sell-high candidate if you can get up to the Devonta Smith, Chris Olave, Jalen Waddle range. With Metcalf, he's had 23 targets this year, comparison to Tyler Lockett at 27, comparison to JSN at 20. He's the wide receiver 22 from a points per game perspective. And over the past 2 years, he's been outside the top 24 wide receivers from a points per game perspective. Now, Rachaad White, James Cook will be our next two backs. James Cook in a phenomenal offense. Rachaad White in a bad offense. James Cook in a game where his team should boat race the New York Giants. Rachaad White in a game where his team will probably lose to the Detroit Lions. But with that being said, the Rachaad White usage is very consistent. It's very safe, where Rachaad White is getting everything in this backfield, everything in the red zone as well. Whereas if you look at the James Cook opportunity, it's kind of going downhill. It's kind of turned into a three-man running back by committee. So I think that if we are looking at these two guys, James Cook is 100% the player to be watching this week and seeing the involvement of Damien Harris and Latavius. Now, Adam Thielen will be our next wide receiver. I know everybody saw our rankings earlier this week. We're screaming at me that Adam Thielen was way too low. I get it. Adam Thielen looks very good, and he is crushed over the past few weeks. Adam Thielen is the wide receiver 10 here from a points per game perspective, and he has not only been winning with efficiency, but he has been winning with volume. Now, with that being said, when you are a 14-point dog in a game, it is very difficult for me to get pumped to go out there and start you. You're in an offense that's not going to be scoring, that's not going to be sustaining drives. I clearly need to say that he's a mid to low-end wide receiver 2 at this point. I just don't necessarily think that he is like the wide receiver 1 as he has been going forward because of this offense. Then Michael Pittman will be our next guy. With Michael Pittman, he actually is an underdog pick him about 63 yards, which is much higher than what you have with Waddle, Olave, Smith. So, I mean, maybe you make the argument Mason Pittman needs to be higher than this, and Pittman has seen volume. And with no Gardner Minshew, it's not like Michael Pittman takes a serious step backwards. With no Gardner Minshew, you may actually see more passing volume in this offense, and the quarterback just won't run as much, So, I mean, even if the Colts score less and have less yardage overall, you still may have more fantasy production going to Pittman and Jonathan Taylor, with Gardner Minshew not really monopolizing it for himself. Like, there were weeks that Anthony Richardson was going out there and having 2 rushing touchdowns. Garrett Wilson, our next guy. Yes, the Jets have looked better as of late. Now, they just played the worst defense in the NFL. And on top of that, ladies and gentlemen, if you look at Garrett Wilson, it's a tough matchup going up against Philly. So similar to Breece Hall, I think we're going to get a sense of who the Jets really are in this game. What I'm kind of hoping is that our next wide receiver in Jordan Addison loses his game to the Chicago Bears, falls to 1-5, and then we have Kirk Cousins sent over to New York and save Breece Hall, save Garrett Wilson. Nonetheless, with Jordan Addison, must-start wide receiver. The man's going to get volume. Kirk Cousins in this offense, I mean, we said it coming into the year, could have potentially led the NFL in passing attempts. I think they're a little more conservative, and they probably have fewer sustained drives overall with Jefferson out. So I don't know if that's going to happen still, but nonetheless, Addison is 100% a player that you are going to start based off of volume, and he's had the efficiency. Now, Christian Kirk will be our next wide receiver at 41. I don't really care one way or another if Christian Kirk is going to see Zay Jones in this game, because Christian Kirk went out there and he changed the usage this past week. He showed that even if Zay Jones does play, that Christian Kirk will be in there for 2 wide receiver sets, which significantly raises his floor. And I was probably wrong to sell him as a low-end wide receiver 2. I thought he was going to fall to be a mid wide receiver 3. Looks like he will be a low-end wide receiver 2 rest of season. Then Deebo Samuel will be our next guy. I think you can make an argument to have Deebo higher than this. The issue is you're going up against Cleveland. Cleveland has a good defense. And at the same time, you're in a spot where Deshaun Watson may not play. So the 49ers may be able to just run the ball over and over again. Now, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin will be our next 2 wide receivers. Very difficult to know how to rank these guys right now. If Mike Evans was 100% healthy, you could make the argument that he would be up there at like 33, 32, 34. But Mike Evans did not practice on Wednesday. He got in a limited practice on Thursday. And you could also make the argument that if Mike Evans does play, and if he were to be 100%, that Godwin may be a little bit lower. So I'm going to rank these guys kind of in the middle ground right now when we don't have the clarity on the Mike Evans hamstring injury. when we don't know if he will be playing, to what extent he will be playing. It's not the easiest matchup in the world going up against Detroit. We can't say, obviously, with Detroit winning this game, most likely winning this game, that Tampa will have to throw the ball in the second half. Now, Jakobi Meyers will be our next wide receiver at 45. And I understand everybody's going to be screaming, going, Mason, Meyers has been so much better than this. And he has been. Meyers has been the wide receiver 15 from a points per game perspective. He's going up against the Pats, where it's a little bit of a tougher matchup. You have Devontae Adams presumably fully healthy. And the main issue is all these wide receivers in this range you want to start. So I understand you want to scream at me for having Meyers this low. All I ask is, instead of saying Meyers is too low, tell me exactly who you would start Jakobi Meyers over. Are you starting Jakobi Meyers over Deebo Samuel? Are you starting Jakobi Meyers over Garrett Wilson? Are you starting him over DK Metcalf? Like, what are y'all doing there? Now, Zay Flowers, our next wide receiver, only the wide receiver 42 from a points per game perspective. But I mean, going out there dominating with volume, had 11 targets this past week in a game where Odell Beckham Jr. and Rashad Bateman both played. Looks like Bateman straight up getting benched. Odell, it looks like he can't really stay on the field. So, I mean, Zay Flowers taking over as the alpha. Obviously, Andrews is the guy, though. Now, Jonathan Taylor, last player in this tier. Jonathan Taylor will slowly but surely climb up these rankings. What I am hoping to see this week is Jonathan Taylor to have 60% of the backfield, Zach Moss to have 40%. And then once that happens, I'll tell you probably next week in these rankings, Jonathan Taylor will be around 22, 23, 24. He'll be around the Puka range. He'll be around the Mixon range, the Alvin Kamara range. And then as he continues to expand his role, I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 to 3 weeks, you have Jonathan Taylor up there around 8, 9, 7, 10, up there in like the Travis Etienne range. Now, DeAndre Hopkins will be our next wide receiver. Hopkins had a bounce back week this past week, ran all the routes, saw the targets. It looks like Burks may not play this week. And if Burks does not play, move Hopkins up. And then with Hollywood Brown, I know everybody wants to have Hollywood higher than this as well. Hollywood's been the wide receiver 20 from a points per game perspective this year, and he has been getting volume. I just don't think this is a good offense. You're a 6.5 point dog against the Rams. And it's similar to the issue with like Adam Thielen, right? Even if you're doing well, when you're in this bad of an offense, it's hard to ever project you to have some massive, massive ceiling. So even if you have a higher floor, I mean, I think I would rather start someone like a Deebo Samuel, just because I think Deebo has a higher ceiling. Now, our next player will be Dameon Pierce. With Pierce expanding his role, the issue is the efficiency hasn't been there. It's a tougher matchup going up against the New Orleans Saints. But as the Houston Texans get these offensive linemen back and healthy, I think you'd be more and more excited about Dameon Pierce overall. Then Zach Moss, our next player. With Moss, I do think that Jonathan Taylor sees the majority of the work. I think that they gave Jonathan Taylor 42 million reasons to show why. I do think the Moss has a role this week that gets phased out as the season goes on. I would look to probably bench both Indianapolis Colts if we could. Then Brian Robinson, Ramondre Stevenson, Alexander Madison, our next three guys. I mean, with Brian Robinson, you're a 2.5 point dog against Atlanta, but should be one of the closer games you play this year. Then with Ramondre Stevenson, you're a 3 point dog against the Raiders. But Ramondre has been one of the most inefficient running backs in the NFL. Ramondre's been in one of the worst offenses in the NFL. And Ramondre Stevenson is splitting the backfields with Ezekiel Elliott. So do I want a committee running back that's inefficient in a horrendous offense? Probably not. And then Alexander Madison, copy and paste. Alexander Madison is now splitting this backfield with Cam Akers. Alexander Madison has been an inefficient running back. And I don't think the Minnesota Vikings are going to be some top-end offense with no Justin Jefferson. So I think Madison kind of finds himself in the same boat as like Ryan Robinson, Stevenson. And then our next tier, we will have Tyler Lockett there at 55. With Lockett, he's at 27 targets this year. I understand he's been disappointing. I think he will be much better going forward. Gabe Davis, 56, has been phenomenal. Gabe Davis, wide receiver 13 from a points per game perspective this season. But you are a little more touchdown or bust there. T. Higgins looks like he may actually play. And I do like T. Higgins as a buy low candidate for the long term. But we've saw twice last year T. Higgins be active and then T. Higgins play one snap and not give you anything. I think we bench T. Higgins this week. Let him get fully healthy. Let Joe Burrow get fully healthy through the bye. And then going into week 8, that's the time where T. Higgins is way higher in these rankings. Amari Cooper, 58. You have a horrendous matchup against San Francisco. Deshaun Watson is not healthy. Same thing here with Jerome Ford. So while I do think Amari Cooper is much better than this for the long term, if you have a banged up Deshaun Watson or maybe a backup quarterback in here going up against the best defense in the NFL, probably a spot that we should be avoiding. But I think that's all we have for you in this video. Of course, if you have not done so already, go down there, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you play fantasy football. And if you want to check out any of those pick'ems that we were talking about in this video, like I said, my favorite's going to be DJ Moore for more than 56.5 receiving yards. You can find that link in the description. You can find that link in the comment section. Promo code FLOCK, 100% a positive match, plus our rest of season fantasy football rankings and tiers, plus a Joe Burrow special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard this Sunday, and a Justin Herbert special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard on Monday night. So please make sure you are taking advantage of that. But thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate you and really hope we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.